All right, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing on with Corporate Strategy, Chapter 9, Strategic Alliances, Mergers, and Acquisitions. Again, we're in the formulation stage, towards the end of the formulation stage of the AFI framework. We're going to learn today Build, Borrow, Buy, and we're going to accomplish Build, Borrow, Buy through strategic alliances, mergers, and acquisitions, or horizontal integration. We start with the Build, Borrow, Buy framework, which is a series of questions that we might ask ourselves. Are we going to build it? Do we have the ability and the resources to grow this internally? If we do, we just build. Or borrowing, this is external to us, but it's very simple. We do it through contracts and strategic alliances. We can get the resources quickly. Or we have to buy, which means we have to go acquire the resources in a much more complicated way, generally through mergers and acquisitions, and that's how we get the capabilities and the core competencies. So that's how a firm really achieves growth, is through build, borrowing, or buying. So we start by identifying the strategic resource gap. We know our growth trajectory, and we know what resources, because we've done our internal analysis, we know what resources we need to achieve that internal trajectory. So we ask ourselves, how relevant are the internal resources that we do have? Can we use them to solve this resource gap? And if they are highly relevant, we build it inside. We develop it internally. We've already got what we need. We address our strategic resource gap internally, and we build. It really is that straightforward. But what if the resources you have are not relevant to the strategic gap? They're low. So now you have to say, okay, the resources I need, how tradable are they? And by tradable, what we mean is, how easily can you get them? Can you get them at the corner store? Are there vendors everywhere for these things? Or are these very niche items? And if they're very tradable, if they're highly tradable, like say, for instance, if you're making something out of concrete and you need a lot of gravel for this concrete, gravel is very easy to get. It's very easy just to go contract for. You can sign a contract for it. It's very tradable. And with that contract, ownership is transferred. You now have the resource, and you are officially borrowing through a license or a contract what you need, the resources you need to grow. Then, if they're not very tradable, how close are you? How close are you to the partner who has this? This is an interesting point when you're dealing with patents, right? So, if you're developing a new pen and someone has a new patent on a new type of flip cap button, and it's nice and smooth and it works really well, they've got a patent on that. Well, how close are you to the firm that owns that patent? And can you join with them either by licensing their patent, which would be a very tradable patent, or do you need to integrate with them through an equity alliance and joint venture in order to use their patent? How complicated is their patent? How good is your relationship with them? So what is a strategic alliance in that matter? And it's agreement between two firms to share knowledge, resources, and capabilities, and or to develop product, processes, or services. So why do you enter into them? Strength of competition, getting into new markets, hedge against uncertainty, access to critical complementary assets. Again, the idea is, so what if, and I can't imagine why it would be, but what if that patented flip cap were such a complicated piece of machinery that you couldn't simply take the patent out of the patent office, pay your licensing fee to them, and then build it yourself? What if you actually needed their technicians to integrate with your technicians and connect them? Remember the lock that had the biomechanical thumbprint reader? That's a very complicated piece of machinery, as is a better lock. Obviously not the one they built. It wasn't very good. But if they went to master locks, those are very complicated. They would need to integrate their firms in a way through a strategic alliance so that they could share those individual technologies and build a new product. So how did Tesla use strategic alliances? They partnered with Daimler for one thing, and they got a cash infusion for that, but they had the ability to build cars. And then they got Toyota's facility in California. And then, of course, they got the batteries through Panasonic. So individual companies may not need to own all the resources, skills, and knowledge necessary to undertake key strategic growth initiatives. I know all this time I've been saying, if it's not your core competency, and your core competency is, of course, based on your resources and your capabilities, if it's not a core competency, you should shy away from moving into this new endeavor. But the idea is, if you can, through an alliance or through acquisition, get the resources you need, then absolutely it's worth taking that extra risk to get where you need to go. So non-equity alliance, the idea is that you just have a contract. I contract with you to provide this good or service. An equity alliance is actually a trade in ownership. I give you 10% of my company, you get 20% of my company. We trade these technologies because we're bringing these technologies together. Or two companies like Masterlock and the Thumbprint company might create a third company that's jointly owned by the two of them, and that's called a joint venture. So the idea is that when already close to your strategic partners, you should really consider integration. So when you do this, though, always consider how well you might be able to integrate with the target firm. Acquisitions are dangerous because firms have trouble coming together due to culture and existing practices. So integration, how well can we integrate? If we do decide to acquire the firm, and the idea here is that Masterlock and the Bioprint company coming together, and instead of a joint venture or instead of an equity alliance, they actually decide one of them is going to buy the other one entirely. Well, what are the actual complications that might arise through that? Particularly through corporate culture, but also through corporate structure. So integration continued. So conditions for integration, the firm: low relevance, low tradability, and a high need for closeness. If the resource that you need is not relevant at all to what you already do, if it is not easily tradable, i.e. you can't just go contract through it, and if it is a high need for closeness, i.e. you need their technicians to come teach you how to do it, then you should consider acquiring and integrating your firm. If all of those three things aren't true, consider any of the other options first. Consider licensing, consider joint ventures, because integrating firms is always risky and you should try to avoid it. Try to find an alternative first. Again, because M&As are complex and costly, a lot of people will end up getting fired. A lot of people will end up losing money. And only when extreme closeness is absolutely necessary should you try to do this. And again, a lot of this has to do with proprietary knowledge and either how secret it is to share it with another company or how complicated it is to share it with another company. So to buy, if you do need to buy, we do that through mergers and acquisitions. A merger is two companies coming together. They come together and they form a combined entity instead of an acquisition, whereas one company buys another one and subordinates it or just absorbs it entirely. Acquisitions can be unfriendly. It can be a hostile takeover. So take, for instance, Elon Musk. While that was an accident, supposedly, he was technically an activist investor, and he came in and said, I'll give you this much money for Twitter. And that was a very hostile takeover. They didn't want to do it at first, but he offered them so much money, and then they legally forced him to do it. It can be very hostile. This is where activist investors come in, like Carl Icahn, who we talked about. He came in and he invested all of that money into Blockbuster, and his whole goal was to take control of it and make it better. And it ended up being a lot of missteps there, but it was a hostile takeover. He bought enough of that company that they could not stop him from taking control of the company. So a merger and acquisition through horizontal integration. We've talked about vertical integration where you buy parts of your value chain, but a horizontal integration is when you buy your competitors. So visually think about your company's here and your competitors are here. Anytime you buy them, you're integrating horizontally into your company. Obviously, when you buy your competitor, all that competition goes away. Hopefully it will lower cost because you can then share some value chain activities between the two companies, and differentiation will hopefully occur because no two companies are exactly alike, and hopefully there will be either some existing differentiation or some innovation that comes of the two cultures coming together. So why do firms acquire one another? Well, to overcome barriers to entry is a big one for sure. If I have enough funding and enough money to go buy a company, take for instance all of the streaming companies right now. The barriers to entry to streaming are extremely high. Only the existing companies in the industry can really access it. Well, if you want to, as part of your strategic objective, get into the streaming industry, The only way to really do that is to buy somebody who already exists in that industry. So in most cases, mergers and acquisitions do not create a competitive advantage, do not realize anticipated synergies, and result in destroyed shareholder value. And this again goes back to the idea that mergers and acquisitions are so problematic. The integration very rarely goes well. You almost always lose a lot of your talent, and you end up becoming very inefficient because you're trying to reduce the redundancies between the two companies. And particularly when it comes to the very large companies, that's a massive project to have such oversight over, and you'll end up actually becoming more inefficient by doing it. So the principal agent problem here, I've talked about this before. The principal agent problem is the idea that you have a principal. The principal is the owner of the company, the shareholder. Their entire goal is to make more money, to have increased value in the company. They own the company. It needs to become more valuable. The agent, the person who acts on behalf of the principal, is the manager, usually the C-suite, the executives. The problem there is that they aren't the owners, and their goal might not be to make more money for the company, or they may be willing to lose money at the beginning for a 10-year strategy where they know they're going to green out, whereas a principal is not going to want that. They want their return on investment sooner than that. So, and again, some of this does have to do with hubris. So if you've got a manager with a big ego, maybe they want to build a large empire. They may make decisions on behalf of the firm that aren't necessarily good for the firm, but they feel good for the manager. Now this manager has 5 companies within their large conglomerate. So in summary, we go through the questions of the build, borrow, buy framework. Through this, we can determine the resources we have, how we should get them at the simplest level, whether we build, borrow, or buy. A great documentary is on Netflix. It's called Downfall, The Case Against Boeing. This is a great example of the problems of mergers and acquisitions. I highly recommend it. It's an hour and a half long. Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, and Boeing had a corporate culture of extreme safety. Everybody knew Boeing planes were such high quality because on the factory floor itself, anyone could speak up about any problem with building the aircraft. Well, then McDonnell Douglas merged with them, and a lot of the McDonnell Douglas leadership took over the corporate headquarters for the new company. Well, when they did that, one of the things that they did was they detached the corporate headquarters from Seattle, where the manufacturers were, and they put it in Chicago. And they did that deliberately because they wanted the managers in a position where they were left alone just to create value and make money for the company. So that means everybody on the factory floor no longer had a voice to speak up against safety. In fact, it became almost taboo. The end result of that was building, what was it, the 777, the Dreamliner? And anyway, several of them fell out of the sky. They crashed due to a problem that could have been prevented by the people on the factory floor having a voice and speaking up against the quality of what they were building. And a lot of lives were lost. All because the cultures of these two companies that came together didn't fit and reduced safety. It's a really interesting documentary. It actually goes by pretty fast. I highly recommend it.